Hello everybody, my name is Yannick Pelletier, I'm a Swiss Grandmaster and we are going to take a look today in the following video at a game between Grischuk and Caruana. This is the final round of the Candidates Tournament in Berlin 2018 and this game is decisive for determining who is going to be Magnus Carlsen's challenger. Caruana before the last round in the lead with half a point, but it is not sure whether a draw is going to be enough for him because he has a bad tiebreak, and he's playing with black against Grischuk, Alexander Grischuk, who is actually out of contention for the first place, but he can help his countryman Carlsen if he plays a good game to qualify perhaps. Well, Grischuk with white played e4, e5, knight f3 and knight f6 by Caruana. The Petrov defense has been his true and just true opening in the last few tournaments, but also in the Candidates Tournament. Caruana has sticked to this very solid opening, and here again he goes for it. Basically, as I said, the situation for Caruana not too clear, because if either Mamedyarov or Carlsen wins the last round, then a draw is not enough for Caruana. Yet he cannot, you know, go all out for a win. He has to play a normal game, and this is exactly what he has chosen to do today by sticking to his favorite Petrov. d4 by Grischuk. This is a bit more aggressive than knight takes e5. Actually, it leads to positions which are a bit less balanced, perhaps, and we are going to get a pawn structure like this, which is certainly not symmetrical, as we can get very often in the Petrov. On the contrary, we have a pawn here on e5 against the pawn on d5, and this will actually determine the following plans by both players actually. But first, here Grischuk plays knight bd2, takes, bishop takes d2, bishop e7, bishop d3, c5, and now we're starting to see the outlines of the pawn structure. Well, still this pawn, of course, here on e5 remaining as the main actor to give white some space advantage on the king side, also a bit in the center. On the other hand, black also has a nice pawn duet here, d5 and c5, controlling many squares also in the center. So basically it's a more or less balanced position, and both players manage actually to develop their pieces quite naturally here. Knight c6, castle, bishop g4, rook e1, queen d7, quite a normal way to continue as well. h3, bishop h5. Well, ideally white would like to get something like g4 and then, you know, play something like f4. But if he plays g4, bishop g6, it's not going to be easy at all to achieve this pawn push f4. First of all, he needs to you know, solve the question of the exchange of the bishops. Should he exchange? Should he go back? Well, in any case, g4 here immediately appears as a weakening move more than anything else for whites, and we'll see also later in the game that achieving this g4 and f4, which would be desirable for white, is actually impossible for white. That means black has actually no problem here. Bishop f4 played by Grischuk, queen e6, a3, castle, b4, and here he decided to go h6, which is a solid move, of course, but also gives white the possibility to change the pawn structure by taking on c5. Bishop takes c5 would follow, of course. Well, I was talking of those two pawns, d5 and c5. Now there is no pawn on c5 anymore, and we have a pawn structure with an isolated pawn on d5, also an open file for white here, which perhaps doesn't really play a big part, and white also has isolated pawns. So basically black is not unhappy with the turn of events here. Instead of this, Grischuk went bishop g3, and now b6, so that black can now choose how he wants to take back on c5. Well, Grischuk decided to change here the character of the game. Certainly he didn't really like the way everything went. Maybe he could have played queen c2, in fact. That would have been a decent option, but then he would have needed to take into account bishop takes f3. The point is that bishop f5 doesn't yield good results because of bishop e4, intermediate move, well, which would actually win here material for black. So after, well, you know, queen c2 is not possible, so he decided to play knight d4. He didn't see any way to improve his position significantly, so he went for p6 changes, hoping that the two bishops, as well seen in the game, will guarantee him maybe slightly better chances. Well, first of all, black cannot take on d4. After queen takes h5, d takes c3, there would be bishop f5, and now there is no good excuse for black. His queen is trapped. When he needs to play g6, he can avoid losing the queen, but his position remains very bad, so white would be clearly ahead here. In other words, no choice. Bishop takes d1, knight takes e6, takes here, rook a d1, but this, you know, whole exchange operations also allowed black to strengthen his pawn structure here, since he has a pawn on e6 protecting d5. This is really important, so that the whole pawn structure now here is actually very solid. Not just solid, but also pretty massive. Well, you know, if black would play a normal move like rook a c8 or something, they might follow something like, well, at least trying to play c4 at some point with white, and maybe, well, perhaps take on c5 first, then c4, and trying to open the position for the two bishops. In this situation, Caruana took a very important and very good decision. He played c4. You might say this is an ugly move because white now gets this nice square on d4. But if white wants to exploit this square, he needs a knight. He needs to go there with a knight. He doesn't have a knight anymore. In other words, c4 is not really a weakening move. Or it might be a weakening move, but white cannot exploit it. So consequences of the weakness on d4 cannot be felt. This makes actually this move c4 very strong, because after bishop c2 b5, well, black would like to play a5, so it's more or less clear that white is going to take the initiative there with a4, a6, and now white can choose when to take, or close perhaps. Well, still, actually, to make sure that white is to make sure that black is all right here, it's important to make sure that f4 doesn't work, because here if white can play 5 solid moves in a row, like bishop h2, g3, maybe king g2, bishop g1, well, he's gonna be maybe slightly better here. Well, it doesn't really work here because of rook a c8, and if you start your plan with bishop h2, there is d4, very strong breaking move, which Caruana certainly anticipated after playing c4. When playing c4, he saw that he always would have this resource, d4, breaking open the queen side, the white's pawns there. So Grischuk doesn't really have a choice. He has to play f3 or something like this at least. And here Caruana reacted very naturally, improving his pieces, but the computer shows an interesting possibility. Knight takes b4, sacrificing a piece in order to get many passed pawns here, connected passed pawns. After rook e2, just bishop e7, and black just wants to push b4, b3, c3, etc. Well, actually, the computer sees it as about equal, which means that black definitely has enough compensation for the piece. Well, he has 2 pawns, but he has enough play here, clearly. But, you know, Caruana was not in a situation where he wants really to take risks or, bring the position in some kind of unbalance. So he played bishop g5, which is very good. He prevents White's idea to play bishop f2 and try and prepare g3, f4 bit by bit. So he goes first there to f4. Actually, on any move, he's going to play bishop f4 next. So, well, bishop f2, bishop f4, bishop c5. This is the only way for White to keep his pawn on e5 protected. Rook d8, bishop d6, bishop g3. Also an important move, otherwise White would play king f2, g3, and f4. This is always this central maneuver for White here, and Black has to try and prevent that in order to be okay. So he went bishop g3 into this hole on g3, rook e2 and g5, and now he's made sure that the black squares here are in his hands. He controls them really well. It's especially with that bishop on d6, White cannot really challenge black there, and that's actually what makes Caruana's understanding of the position so deep here. Well, king f1, king f7, bishop c7, rook e8 simply, bishop d6. And it's interesting, White repeats the position. Grischuk was already in time trouble. Caruana had a little bit more time, but not too much either. Well, here he could have repeated the position, rook d8, and eventually it would have proven enough in order to finish first in the candidates tournament and qualify. But Caruana perhaps didn't really have the time to walk around and check the games of Mamedyarovs and Kyriakins. So he actually decided that his position was actually superior, and he played on with rook a c8. Very interesting, very strong as well, because by playing this move he actually gives up the a file, and Grischuk uses that immediately, rook a1. But he's understood that White wouldn't be able to exploit the a file, and if he tries to do so, then he will have to surrender the square d4, which will allow black to push this pawn. He could have done it maybe immediately, but rook e d8 is good too. And here I think Grischuk started playing some inaccurate moves, perhaps mistakes even. He should have gone back to d1, kind of trying to stop d4 as long as possible. So that would have probably be better. So he went bishop b1, which is a bit hard to understand. Rook d7. And, well, now maybe he should have taken on b5 and played rook a6. But then h5. He would be able to secure the bishop some more, and later on probably to try and improve his position even more. Black is slightly better, but perhaps nothing tragic yet for White. Well, Grischuk went rook a3 again. I don't really see the point of this move. So he played d4. Simple and strong, breaking open the center and creating a passed pawn on the queen side. This one here. A takes b5 takes, c takes d4 takes, rook e8. Well, the a file is not that important, especially after the retreat here on c6, and now we have this big problem here, the pawn on e5 being attacked. Well, especially after a move like rook e2, you can take anyway on e5 with a nice little line, bishop takes e5. Rook d1 check and mate to follow. So bishop e4 was played, but this basically gives up a pawn. Bishop takes e5, bishop takes c6, rook takes d6. Well, it doesn't really give up a pawn because he can take back on b5 here. In any case, now with opposite colored bishops on the board, we could believe that White's chances to make a draw are quite good, but it's an illusion actually. First of all, this pawn is much stronger than that one on b4, and still those squares here are weak, and this allows black to create some active play on these squares. Especially the presence of rooks on the board make black's advantage felt really much. So he went rook d1, check, rook king here, rook g1, king e3, and rook b1, hitting b4, of course, rook a6, king f6. Both players reached the time control, move 40, so they got actually 50 more minutes here. which is of course quite important when you have to try and exploit an advantage. Well, black is of course still much better here. Bishop d7, bishop f4 check, king e2, rook d8. Well, I said the c pawn is stronger than b pawn. In case of b5, c3, you can see first of all the rook on b1 ideally placed here to stop the b pawn first of all, but also preparing rook b2 in order to try and exploit the strength of the c3 pawn. So it's not really possible, so he tried this, giving up the pawn. Well, objectively maybe rook g1 would have been even stronger here, and after king f2, rook d1 hitting the bishop, but Caruana kept on playing very naturally. Rook takes b4. So he has a pawn, and he's a pawn up, and he's just much more active here. Bishop c6, and well, allowing c3. This is pretty strong, because now if rook takes c3, rook d2, the king is forced to go to the first, and rook b1 mates on the next move. So he has to try and change. If white managed to exchange all rooks here, let's dream a bit, maybe he would be able to hold the draw. He would have good chances at least. But with rooks on the board, 4 rooks of course, but also even just a pair of rooks would be enough for black to win. Well, so Caruana could have taken probably on d7 here, but his move rook c8 is better, is simply stronger. He keeps all pieces on the board, and now especially after rook takes c3, there is rook b6 pinning the bishop, which is actually going to be lost. So he went bishop e4, but now the win is pretty straightforward for black. He just improves his position to the maximum. Rook b2, another strong move, preventing rook takes here because of rook d2, mate. So he went back to e2, h4, and he keeps that rook on b2. He doesn't, well, he could certainly try to, to take here on c2, and I guess he would win it as well. But the rook on b2 is so much more active than the one on c2 that he can afford staying there on b2, especially rook takes b2, c takes b2 would be in black's favor, so he can afford keeping the tension here. Rook d1, king e5, rook a1, rook d8, rook d1 back, rook b8. Well, it's pretty, I would even say easy technique for a top player like Caruana. Rook c6, rook b1, and now he turns his attention to the first rank. He's going to go to g1, trying to take or attack at least this pawn here. King f2, rook a1, rook c4, and now, well, he proposes the exchange of rooks when everything is ideally placed and his king ready to take back on d4. So he doesn't want to take it, but rook b4 is coming, king e2, and king f4. He wishes to enter to g3. So king f2 makes sense, of course. And rook b1, look at those two rooks creating terrible threats here. Rook f8 check, king e5, bishop d3, rook b2 again. Well, it's just a matter of time here, and black can do it very slowly. King e2, rook e1, king f2, rook c1, and now it's getting more concrete. At some point it has to become concrete so that black makes progress, and now he forces breaking. Actually, he manages to break the locker here on c2 by playing rook c1. So white has to exchange a rook. If he takes on c1, then there is this check here, this covered check on the king, and c2 is coming, and it's over very quickly. So rook takes b2 takes, rook b8, and bishop c3. Well, now black will quickly occupy all the best squares here. King e5, rook b4, e5, and king g3. In this position, understandably, Grischuk decided to resign, and indeed his position is completely hopeless. He can do nothing against, for instance, rook g1 takes g2. Well, black could perhaps even take on g2 and then take on h3. So thanks to this win, Caruana qualifies to the final of the World Championship. He's going to challenge world champion Magnus Carlsen in November 2018, and this is going to be a very interesting match, even though the defender Magnus Carlsen is going to be the favorite quite clearly, but Caruana is not left without chances. He has a very strong team of seconds, especially Kasim Chernov, who is a former second of former world champion Viswanathan Anand, and well, we'll see, who knows. In any case, it's going to be a very interesting and attractive match. So, well, we'll see in London in November 2018. Thank you for your attention, and if you liked the content, please subscribe to the channel and like the video. Thank you and goodbye.